Well, welcome. I'm Murray Dial. I'm the Dean of the Merrick School of Business, and really on behalf of Dean Hartley, who's here, the Dean of the College of Public Affairs, and myself, we really welcome you to this event. Usually for events like this, you have a biography and the story of the speaker that you give out, but this kind of event's about the speaker and the story. So rather than give Chris's biography, and I know a number of you have read or seen his book or got his book, let me just give you a kind of brief introduction to Chris. I met Chris, when I first came to. I've been here for 4.5 years. Chris was a student on our Ratcliffe Entrepreneurship Fellows program. And that program is actually quite challenging, right, Chris?
Yeah.
Chris graduated from it. And one of the criteria for graduating is not only do you get academic credit, you cannot get academic credit for the final course unless you launch a business. And in his year, unless you actually got serious revenue, and you have to prove the serious revenue, right?
Yeah.
And Chris proved it. I think it's the first time a professor's actually seen dollar notes being placed on his desk.
Yeah.
But Chris launched that, and that's how I met. But one of the things about UB and the Merrick School of Business in general that we often talk about is that we're a school where we help students get things done, because that's what in business people really require, getting things done. And as soon as I met Chris, I really knew that he was someone who gets things done and wants to get things done. But I think it's even more profound getting things done, because we live in a society, in a city where we in this room are largely extremely privileged, but we live in a society where there are a considerable number of our citizens are not as privileged, and in fact, more than not as privileged, are living through a pure hell. And then getting out of that system is extremely challenging. So Chris's story is a lot about how this system works that incarcerates a mass number of people, and also about a really story of bravery about how to get out of that system, and live, using a quote, live with purpose.
That's right.
So the format we're going to have tonight is that Chris is going to talk, tell his story, and then my colleague Andrea Cantora, who is a professor in the College of Public Affairs, who runs our Second Chance program, which is a program that we run at MCI Jessup as part of a Pell Grant initiative, pilot program for degree students. She's going to interview Chris for a little while, and then I'm going to give you the chance to ask Chris some questions. So that's our format. So Chris, over to you.
Thank you. So it's really good to be back on this stage, actually. I remember a few years ago when I was thinking of business ideas, my professor, J.C. Weiss, would reserve space in this theater, and he would just Graham, I was terrified to get up on stage and to speak, and so he made me do it over and over and over again. And there would be times where I would fall asleep on the stage sometimes, and the people who shut down would come and say, "Hey, you got to leave," and I'd be like, "Just give me 10 more minutes. Let me run through my slides." And so it's really, really good times. And so I like to tell stories, so I'm gonna share my story with you guys. When I was younger, I remember I used to look up to my grandfather. And I remember one day I went to the hospital with my grandfather, and we sat in a room and we waited for doctors to give us a prognosis after him fighting a long battle with skin cancer. And so I remember the doctor coming into the room, and he takes his glasses off, and he starts to clean them, and we're looking at him, and he just puts them back on. And he says, "Mr. Harvey, here's the deal. If you allow us to amputate your legs, maybe you'll live, maybe. He says, but if you hold on to him, you'll probably be dead in about 2 months. And so I'm looking at my grandfather. My grandfather's quiet. He's not saying anything. So I'm not going to lie to you guys. I started begging my grandfather to get the amputation because my father wasn't in my life, so my grandfather took on that role as being a father figure in my life. But my grandfather decided to hold on to his legs. So we went home, and we spent every day as if it was his last day. And I would sit on the porch with him, and we'd watch the sunrise. He would watch it set. I would sit by his bedside while cancer slowly ate my grandfather alive. And I was 16 at the time, and I was trying to figure out life, and it seemed like my grandfather had figured out life. Then he would turn to me, and he would say, Chris, you know, all the money that I made and like all the houses that I own, it just don't mean anything to me. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? And he was like, all I can think about is like how much I love you guys, my family. That's all that mattered to me. And I remember when my grandfather was on his deathbed, he called for me. And my grandfather was like, Chris, I'm disappointed in you. I'm disappointed in you because you out here in the streets and you carrying guns and you smoking weed and you allowing these people to manipulate you and like you on the chess team and like you play the cello and you're so book smart but you don't apply yourself. I don't understand. And I didn't really have a response to him, but he was like, I want you to promise me that you'll turn your life around. I didn't know how I was going to turn my life around. I was like, all right, Grandpa. And he was like, I need you to make sure you like look out for your mom too. Like, you know, look out for my mom. My mom was his youngest child. And I was like, all right, Grandpa, all right, you got it. And then he says, I wish I could like live longer to see the Redskins win another Super Bowl. Sorry. And then my grandfather passed away. And so I was growing up in Washington, D.C. at the time. It was a very tough neighborhood. This was the late 80s, early 90s. And there was so much gun violence in my neighborhood that bullets would like literally go through our houses at night. And so my grandmother would make us sleep on the floor or in the bathtub. And so one night, I rolled up in my blanket and I lay down on the floor and I read this story, Plato's Allegory of the Cave. Now in this story, imagine prisoners as far as the eye can see, mostly men, and they sat shackled and chained and they faced the wall. There was a fire behind them to keep them warm, but it also cast shadows on the wall in front of them. So the prisoners made a daily game out of trying to identify lifelike characters within the shadows. And they would look and they would say, that's a tree, that's a bird, that's a car, and they would laugh, and this was their reality. And they were okay with this. But one prisoner felt like it had to be more to his life than sitting shackled and chained and eating disgusting food and laughing at shadows. So this prisoner decided he was going to starve himself in an attempt to slip out of his chains and hopefully escape this cave. 2 weeks go by, 20 pounds lighter, his friends are sleeping, he manages to slip out of his chains. As he struggles to stand up, because he never stood up before, and he walks past his friends and past the fire, and once he gets close to the exit of the cave, the sunlight hits his eyes, and he turns away in pain, because he had never seen the sun before. And so while he's standing there thinking, like, should I embrace this pain? Or maybe I should rechain myself and go back to like what's comfortable, what I know. And the prisoner says, you know what, I'm gonna embrace this pain. So the prisoner embraces the pain and makes it out the exit of the cave. He's instantly blinded by magnificent light. He sees vibrant colors for the first time of his life. He sees green trees bobbing back and forth, and grass, and children playing and flying kites. He hears water rushing from a nearby stream. His eyes adjust further, and he stares out into the mountain ranges, and he sees birds, and he sees the clouds, and he's just taking it all in. And it's so beautiful to him that he begins to cry. How can all of this exist, he wonders. And while he's standing there, his friends wake up, and they're down there, and they laugh, and they're like, oh, that's crazy, look at that, that's a tree, look at that, that's a bird. And he starts to laugh, but then he stops, and he starts to pity his friends, because they think that's the reality, and it's this beautiful world out there. So while he's pondering this existential moment, a guard spots him, and the guard looks at him, and the guard says, what the hell are you doing outside of the cave? And the prisoner said, listen, man, just let me stay out here. I didn't know all this stuff was out here, man. It's so beautiful. I could behave. Just give me a second chance. Like, let me, and the guard becomes angry. And the guard says, no, you got to go back down in the cave because that's where you people belong, down there in the cave, not out here with us. And so the prisoner is chained and returned to the cave. And because he was outside of the cave in the sunlight and he's back down and it's dark, his eyes hasn't adjusted. He can't even see anything. And so his friends, they mock him and they tease him for trying to be different, for trying to buck the system. And one prisoner says, look at you. You thought you was better than us. And now your eyes don't work. I got an announcement for all of you prisoners. Anyone tries to escape this cave, we're going to kill you because all we got is us. And then the story ends. You see, this story reminded me of the neighborhood that I grew up in Washington, D.C. in the early 90s. We had a homicide rate in 1 year of almost 500. People in my neighborhood would be killed for their tennis shoes. And I remember I would ask my grandma, like, who are we at war with? And my grandmother would tell me, Chris, don't worry about it. Just say your prayers. Just go to school, and everything's going to be okay. But then my brother was shot in front of the house. He survived. Then my cousin was shot 17 times in his face, and he passed away. And I remember the feeling when my mom came in and told me, like, Chris, your cousin's gone. And I remember just losing my breath, and I remember just becoming angry. And my grandmother again would tell me, just go to school, say your prayers, everything will be okay. But I couldn't learn in school, thinking about the images of all my friends, all my family members who laid out on my block. And so my mom at the time was dating a police officer. And this police officer used to verbally and physically abuse my mom. And he was kind of like Denzel Washington in Training Day, like smooth, but like wasn't a good guy, right? And so one day he comes home and he smacks me with his gun. And when I wake up, he's sexually assaulting my mom. And he takes his gun and he bashes my mom's skull in. Now, my mom survived, but that incident changed her forever. She was never the same. I was never the same. For some reason, my grandmother said, Chris, life's not easy, life's tough, but just say your prayers and go to school. It's going to be okay. And I was like, how, Grandma? And at this point, I'm 17. I have buried 5 of my friends, and 2 were gunned down in front of me. And so at this point, I'm carrying a firearm. People in my neighborhood would tell me, Chris, all we got is us. We got to stick together. And then one day, these same people came after me, and I ended up taking a person's life. Now, while in jail, charged as an adult, people came after my brother. They tortured my brother and killed my father. To make matters worse, I was found guilty, and I was sentenced to natural life in prison. Now, if you can imagine, going to prison is like being teleported to another planet. Humiliating strip searches every day. No privacy. No girlfriends. And I remember just sitting there in the rec room, staring out the window with a life sentence, smoking weed, no future. And I was just thinking, like, I don't have a mustache on my face. I just got here. I haven't done anything with my life. But I knew in my heart that I was a good person. I knew that I can change. And so I remember a guy in the day room was looking at me. He had 5 years, 3 years in on 5. And he was like, man, all we got to do is stick together. All we got is us, right? And I was like, man, you going home, man. But his comment reminded me of the story that I read as a child. And I just started thinking. And I looked around and I saw this guy who was in the corner who also had a life sentence, sentenced at 16. And he had a big stack of computer books, and he was just writing code out on paper, right? Scribbling. So I walked over to him, and I was like, what you working on? And he looked at me, and he says, I'm going to teach myself computer programming. I'm going to get out of prison. I'm going to start a software company. I'm going to become successful. I'm going to buy my dream car, right? And I remember laughing at him. And I was like, dude, you don't even have a computer. How are you going to pull this off? And he looked at me and said, it doesn't matter. And then I looked around in the day room, people were getting tattoos, people were fighting, people were doing push-ups, people were yelling at the news, and here this guy was just in the corner studying. So I figured, I want to do what he's doing. And so he eventually became a mentor to me. And so I remember locking myself into my cell for about 3 days. And I thought about, what's my end game? How do I want people to remember me as a person? What would they say about me when I'm gone? And so I called it my master plan. And so in this master plan, I knew that I wanted to get a high school diploma. I wanted to earn a college degree. I wanted to teach myself Spanish. I wanted to buy my dream car, a black Corvette. I wanted to travel around the world. I wanted to write a book that told my story, that inspired other people around the world. But most importantly, I wanted to be free again. I wanted to be free to return into the impoverished communities, return people or lead people out of the figurative cave and show them a better way of living. So every day, all I did was exercise, study, and go to therapy. But the prison officials would tell me, Chris, life means life. Your place is in here, not out there in the real world. Well, I read hundreds of books. I got my high school diploma. I earned a college degree. I taught myself to read and write and speak in Spanish and Italian and went on to learn Mandarin. I started a book club. I started a career center, became a mentor. When I put on 30 pounds of muscle. So 10 years had went by, and I hadn't wasted a day. And I kept trying to get back in court to get my sentence reconsidered. And every time they would tell me, like, no, not this time. We're not ready. And I remember, like, walking the rec yard, and I was mentoring this guy from El Salvador, and he was like, Chris, man, I don't really understand, man. Like, I see all these people get out, they come up, they go out, and they come back, and they go out. And you helped all these people in here, but yet you can't get a second chance. And I was like, I don't know, man. Like, I'm just doing the best I can. He says, I never hear you talk about God, Chris. And he was like, I'm not trying to get too religious with you, but maybe that's what's missing from your life. Now, I believed in God. I just didn't understand God. I didn't understand how God could allow my mom to be attacked and violated, and she never harmed anyone. I didn't understand how God could allow so many stray bullets to take my friends away from me in my neighborhood. I didn't understand how God allowed people to treat me different just for the color of my skin. And so I would sit in my cell at night and I would read my master plan. And I would say, God, I've heard about you. I've heard about stories of you parting seas and like turning water into wine, all these things, right? All these signs that you've given to people that I've heard about, right? I just need my sign. And I remember holding up a plastic spoon. I was like, can you bend this spoon, right? And the spoon didn't bend. And I was just like, can you say something? And then God didn't say anything, right? And so I figured like, well, it was around like 2000, something like that. And Bush was destroying the economy and it was the war on terror. So I figured God was busy trying to solve those things. And so I would just read to God. And I would say, God, if you show me a sign, I will commit my life to going back into the toughest communities, being an example and leading people out of the figurative cave. I'll be successful. I'll go back, even if it like cost me my life. But I need a sign to know that you're up there. And so it's crazy just thinking about this. Like a few weeks later, my lawyer comes to see me. And my lawyer would visit me throughout the years for many years, right? Every couple of months. And he would come see me and just encourage me. And like I'm serving a life sentence. Like what did he really had to tell me? But he would come see me and say, like, what you studying? Like he like genuinely like cared about me and like would push me to keep studying and give me hope. And so this day, I'm talking to him. It's like, yeah, I'm up to like 800 characters in Mandarin. This what I'm doing. And he just was like, you got a court date. And I was like, what? He was like, the judge wants to see you. And I was thinking, I was like, well, maybe this is the sign. And if you can imagine, this was the biggest job interview of my life. And so 2 months later, we're standing in the courtroom. And the state's attorney is tearing into me. Your Honor, Mr. Wilson, his sentence is appropriate. Life means life. He should stay in there. And I remember like speaking and talking about, I understand, like, it's her job to say that, right? But like what my lawyer talked about was all those progress reports on the judge's desk. Every year that I wrote the course and I talked about what I would do, I've always exceeded my goals. 10 years of consistency is what he said. And I remember just talking to the judge and talking about what it felt like to watch my friends gunned down in front of me. What it felt like as a mama's boy to watch my mom violated. I love my mom more than anyone. And just like how it felt to just walk around being angry as a young child. I talked about remorse for like what I've done. I talked about all the education I've accomplished. But most importantly, I talked about like what I would do if she gave me a second chance. And I know this is probably stupid, but I think I said something like, even if you don't let me out, Your Honor, I'll go back to prison. I'll grow old. I'll continue to study and continue to mentor because that's who I am. And for some reason, the judge just stared at me for a little bit. And I remember it was my lawyer, none of my family had showed up. And there was a lot of people in the audience. And she just stared at me for a little bit. And the audience was looking at me, looking at the judge, like, what you gonna do? And my heart was just beating. I could see it beating through my shirt. And she was like, Mr. Wilson, you committed a terrible crime, but your accomplishments behind the fence was nothing short of amazing. And I'm gonna give you a second chance to get out, but you can't be regular. You can't just get a job and fly under the radar. You wrote, you got these plans, you wanna write a book, you wanna travel, you better do all these things, and you better not disappoint me. And so I ended up spending 16 and a half years in prison. And I remember when I first came home and I'm out and I was unemployed, I didn't have a place to stay, I'm sleeping on my friend's sofa, I had $50 in my pocket, I just had my master plan and I wanted to come here to University of Baltimore. And so I came here, I met with Kathy Anderson, she just retired now with the Dean of Student Affairs, and I talked to her and I just asked her to give me a chance to demonstrate myself as a student. And they let me in. And so my mom found out that I was home, and she was like, oh my God, I can't believe you home. Chris, how'd you get out? Did you break out? I don't understand. I thought you had life. What's the deal? And I remember talking to my mom, I got this plan. She was like, Chris, you sound different. You sound like a grown-up. And I was like, because I'm mature, Mom, I got this plan. And then my mom started acting weird. And she was like, it's just some things I want you to remember, Chris. I want you to remember that I love you. And I was like, all right, Mom. She was like, I want you to remember to finish your plan and do all these things. Like, Chris, just remember that I love you. And I was like, Mom, you're on speakerphone. You're embarrassing me. And she was like, just remember. And so when my mom hung the phone up, she wrote a letter and committed suicide. So she never even had a chance to see me as a free man. But if my mom was out in the audience today, I would tell my mom, Mom, I've been home 7 years from prison. I'm the owner of several multi-million-dollar successful companies here in Baltimore that help people that need help the most. I would tell my mom as of last Sunday, I've helped 274 people in Baltimore City get jobs. I would tell my mom how I'm only 6 classes away from earning my second college degree. I would tell my mom how, remember, I used to read encyclopedias and talk and dream about just traveling the world. Well, just in the past year, I've visited 20 countries. I would tell my mom how I went from feeling invisible and solitary confinement to coming home and winning every award in the state of Maryland, including a presidential award from Obama. I would tell my mom how, remember how you used to buy me those Matchbox cars when I was small, or those Corvettes? Well, I worked really hard, and I went out and I bought one. It's outside. I don't know. I would tell my mom, remember my friend Stephen who mentored me, who told me that I could become a better person, that I could change, and that I could be successful. Well, it took him 20 years, but he's home, and he started his software company, and he brought his dream car. I would tell my mom, remember how I used to be shy around women? Well, a few years ago, I became close friends with superstar Alicia Keys, and I drove around Baltimore and I was taking selfies. This is true. Or maybe I would just tell my mom that I loved her one more time. You see, people, I understand why my grandfather was disappointed in me. And it's because he wanted me to make a difference in the world. And that's what I'm trying to do with this book and telling my story. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much for sharing your story. There's more to that. If you haven't read his book, they're outside the door for purchase. It's hard to follow that, but I do have some questions for you before we open it up to the audience. Chris, you know what I do. You know that I run a program in prison about 16 miles from here, maximum secure prison. We have 43 students right now in class, University of Baltimore students. They are really in class right now as we speak,
Awesome.
but they're incarcerated. And you've been in a few times.
Yes.
You've met our students. They love when you come in. Chris even spent a few sessions helping our students work on their master plan. So you know our guys. They're taking classes. They're so motivated. They're so focused. Education is their life. They're thinking about their career. They're thinking about what they're going to do when they come home. And then people come home, and it's hard, and you know that.
Right.
Even though when you're on the inside, you have these big dreams and big visions, and you're gonna conquer the world when you come home. But it's not always like that for everybody. So I want to ask you, what kind of advice do you give people coming home, especially people who are highly motivated and they're doing incredibly well on the inside?
Right. I mean, that's a very important question. I think the standard stuff is know that it's going to be difficult, especially finding a job, finding a safe place to stay, things like that. But one of the things that surprised me that's perhaps the most difficult for folks returning home from prison, it's like the emotional aspect of it. Like I got out of prison, I was 32 years old, and I lived in DC, and I just remember seeing people my age who like had a house and like had a car and like had a family and stuff, and it kind of gave me like this urge to like want to like rush and try to like get back to life, you know, get my life back. And I think that's a mistake that a lot of people make, is trying to rush and do that. And I just, you know, I remember like, you know, didn't have a job, and like, you know, people would laugh at me and say, you don't got a car, you gonna pick me up on your bike? And so it was tough for me. And that's something that I try to talk to a lot of men and women when they come home. It's like, don't rush, and just like take your time. And the most important thing is surround yourself with people that can give you that emotional support. Because there was times where I would just be sitting down and it's like, this not happening fast enough. Or like, I know I'm capable of doing this, but they won't give me the job. And I had people in my life that would be like, encourage me, like emotionally. And it's like, it's gonna be all right, Chris, you know, just keep working. And so that would be my advice.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because a lot of our students, they're mid-30s, almost 40s, average age, and they went in 16, 17 years old.
Right.
So it's hard to process that. You know, I've been working with this population for many years, and I can't process that. You know, somebody going in at that age and trying to adjust 20 years later to everything we have in society. Another question I really want to ask you, and I'm so curious if other people talk to you about this on your book tour, because it's a question I feel like is not asked a lot, because it's a tough one. There's many years we've seen a lot of reforms around criminal justice.
Right.
You know, a lot of people are trying to reduce mass incarceration. States, federal government is changing things around how we sentence people who are nonviolent, low-level drug offenders, right? That's the grouping of people that we
Right.
change our laws and reduce our sentencing for. But politicians and the public, they don't want to talk about giving second chances to someone who committed a violent offense.
Right.
So I feel like that's an important conversation to have, and I'm just curious of what do you say to the politicians and the public who don't want to give a second chance to a violent offender?
So it makes me think about when I was before the judge, or just my time in therapy, when I was in prison for over the years, over a decade. And it's important for those lawmakers and legislators to understand what people go through, especially like in impoverished communities, what they go through before they commit a crime. And things like, you know, most of the time, the victimizers start out as the victim. You have someone that's being constantly bullied and like beat up and like stuff is happening, and then like at a certain point, like they want to defend themselves, or maybe they've been hurt so bad that they feel like the only way to like, you know, find peace is like hurt other people. Like I know it sounds crazy, but like hurt people. And so it's important for us as a society to think about that and also address how we treat like victims and people who suffer from trauma. And so I just try to relay that message to folks, especially young people. Like in the state of Maryland, I think it's like 300 people who were juveniles who were sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole, but they can't get a second chance to get out. And it's like, it doesn't make sense. Like these are children who make these decisions, their brains aren't developed. And like, what does that say about us, like as a society, if we treat our children like this? And so it's pretty tough.
Yeah, and I know, so Chris sometimes will show up in Annapolis when, you know, there's legislation around some of these issues, and he'll talk about these things. I don't know if it works, but I feel like your story will have some kind of impact on people who are making these big decisions, and just educating the public that we need to give more people second chances.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think about, you know, just make sure I be an example. So when I go down and speak, I know they say like, you know, folks can't get out and turn their lives around and stuff. And so I try to be a positive example even when people are not looking. Because I think about the people that's behind the fence that are waiting for their second chance. And so it's important for me to do the right thing.
Yeah, thank you. So something that Chris is trying to do, he's trying to get his book into every prison in the country, about 3,000, more than 3,000 prisons.
Yeah. 3,000 prisons, yeah.
And that's important, right? Your book is inspiring to so many people in prison, but so many people not in prison, so many people who have never even been touched by incarceration directly or indirectly. Tonight we have a great audience from the University of Baltimore. We have students, we have faculty, we have staff. We have people who are out from the community who came to hear you speak. I feel like your story can resonate with so many people. How can your book benefit this group, this community here?
So I like that you, like this, the book can apply to anyone, right? And so it's not just someone who's been impacted by the criminal justice system. And so even like when I was growing up, like surprisingly, like I wanted to be a police officer, and I had like this dream, I wanted to travel the world and all this other crazy stuff. But maybe it's like someone who works at a job that they're just doing it because like they need to pay the bills, but they don't like what they're doing. It's not purposeful work, and maybe, you know, they want to, you know, save the trees or something in like California or whatever, and like spend their summers in like Mexico or something, right? Or whatever, right? But like you think about, who is the person I want to become? How do I want to be remembered? And then you work backwards and you think about like what you need to do. Is it education? Do I need to like connect with like certain people? And you write it down. You write it down, and then you share that plan with someone and give them the power to hold you accountable. And so for me, I shared it with my grandmother. And you know, everyone listens to grandma. So I shared my plan. I was like, this is what I'm doing. She's like, you better do it. You know, you better not be like wasting no time. You better like handle it. And so that's a few things that like people can do. The other thing too is like, even with the criminal justice system, like I would say that it's broken, but some people think the system's working just fine. Decimating communities, particularly people of color, stripping people's right to vote and all that, like it's working fine. But I would encourage people to be more conscious about what's going on, especially on the local level. Our judges, our prosecutors who have a lot of discretionary power, right? And so instead of just thinking about like on a national level, and we should also think about what's happening on the ground and do research and hold people accountable. And like, because we can't, like, we got enough complainers in the city. Yeah, this is messed up and this crime, but like, when do we show up? So we got to show up and hold people accountable.
And the big takeaway, I mean, maybe you answered this already, but what is the big takeaway of your book, if you were just to, you know, give one example?
I would say, so my book, it took me 2.5 years to write it, and it is an attempt. I wanted to do it since I was young. It is an attempt to raise the level of consciousness of people, particularly here in America. And I grew up under difficult circumstances, and I got every excuse to be messed up, every excuse to be someone to like call me a monster on TV because of like what I went through, but I'm not. And I want to encourage people like that. You don't have to be defined by a mistake that you made at a point in your life, right? That doesn't define who you are. And I want people to be motivated to like want to change their lives, to want to like travel the world and like seek financial independence. It's not a pipe dream, right? It's no excuses. And then maybe some people who've already achieved these dreams, right? I want them to think about the other Chris's and Christines of the world. And maybe it's someone that's in your neighborhood that you see and maybe you like nod your head to them, but maybe you take some extra time. And I've only made it this far because a handful of people saw potential in me, even when I did see it in myself, and they would sit me down, even as an entrepreneur. My professors would do this. They would go over my books and like, what is this line item right here? This is garbage. Like, do this, fix this. This is what you need to be doing. But they push me to allow me to be successful. And so I imagine a world where we all done that for people in our community.
That's awesome. I'm going to end there with that and allow the rest of you guys to answer.
So now it's your turn, and if somebody has a question, I'm going to ask the first question. I get to ask the first and the last question while you're thinking about it. But you know, Chris, the back of the book here, there's 38 things that you should remember to.
I think like 33
things to write. You know, for people thinking about master plan, and you said the book applies to everybody. What would be the most important principle you think that people should start with in thinking about their master plan?
I would say the most important, I got it. Create your own personal board of advisors, right? So at least 5 people, and don't tell them that you want them to be advisors, because like smart, busy people don't want to like sign up to sit on anyone's board, right? So you got to trick them, right?
Unless you've been paid a lot.
Unless you get to get paid, like, yeah. So what I do is like I found someone who was like really like emotionally intelligent, like relationship stuff. Like I don't know everything. I found someone who was like good with like finances. They can go over my numbers, crunch numbers. I found someone that was like a travel guru that's like travel the world and give me advice. But like whatever it is, right? And like have these people in your life. And what you do is you invite them to coffee like once a month or lunch, and then you pick their brain about like whatever it is like that I'm an expert in. And you genuinely should like care about what's going on in their life too, right? So it should be like reciprocal. Right? But you do that, but like. And I swear by this, right? And you navigate your life like that, and you just have like a support system, and it just feels really good when you're out in the business world or you out just like starting your life to know that you got a core group of people that have your back. And so I swear by that.
Good. So there's one right up here. Sorry, it'll start. Yeah. You should have had that first.
I can actually speak louder.
Yeah, I can hear.
I'm good at this. Hi, Chris. Thank you for coming and sharing your story with us. And first off, I guess my question is, what would your advice be to people who want to help out and assist people with trying to have their second chance? Like, where would you suggest us start to go, be a volunteer somewhere, or help out with the return back into reality?
Got it. So I would say there are people on the ground that's doing this work, that's been doing this work, and that are also not getting enough support. So it could be you volunteer your time, like take Center for Urban Families, like the STRIVE program, and like they're working with people like they just come home from prison or just like going through something in the community. And maybe it's volunteering your time for a couple of hours, or maybe you're an expert at something, or maybe you're like super knowledgeable at sharing that knowledge with someone and taking the time to do that. Or you could donate like to someone that's like doing the work. You don't actually like have to solve the problem, but you can help solve it. And so that would be my suggestion.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Chris.
What's up, brother, man?
There we go.
Objective.
That's right. First of all, congratulations. I've enjoyed many of our conversations together, and it was an incredible surprise to see you on Trevor Noah.
Yeah.
I was like, what? So, to pay homage to you as a strong man and as a strong Black man. And I'm going to set this up in a couple of ways because I do arts education in middle schools. And oftentimes I'm one of the only Black men in the school,
Right.
which is disheartening. And of course, this is an historical thing that's going on from back in the 60s when they created these social safety net programs with the stipulation that the black man should not be in the home.
Yep.
Which actually flipped the situation from 75% of black men being in the home to 25% of black men being in the home. And it's played itself not just in the home, but in the schools.
Yep.
And so for many of us who have engaged in the fight to end the school-to-prison pipeline, it has become very precarious because we don't have the allies that we need. Right. And so many of us have been grappling with how do we get more black men in the schools?
Right.
So someone such as yourself, who I've always admired, that maybe we can find some sort of strategy to bring men back into the schools so that our young, not just our young boys, but our young girls,
Right.
can see someone like yourself.
Right.
And not just to be inspired, but to be nurtured and loved, to look at someone and say, I know they're looking out for me.
Right.
So, I don't know, I'm just putting it out there that maybe there's some strategies, some ways in which we can make that happen, because I know you're doing this work, D. Watkins is doing this work,
Right.
there are others who out here in Baltimore are doing this work, finding some comprehensive strategy at some level
Right.
where this can happen.
So, like I said earlier, my national plan is to get my book into like all of the prisons, but not just that. So I've sent my book, hundreds of books, to Baltimore City schools, KIPP schools, all of the juvenile detention facilities, and I've been going in. Was very, very important, at least for us in this city, right? What's very, very important is when we go back into these communities, like people need to see people that look like them, that come from where they come from, that's successful, and we gotta be consistent with showing up. And I remember, my cousin texted me the other day, and he was like, yeah, my aunt said she saw you like on TV or something like that, and she was like, man, I tried to help him, and like he wanted to do what he did. He got off to prison. He wouldn't have went to prison. He would listen to me, right? And so my cousin was like, Ma, you know what young people respect? Or she was like, what? And he was like, consistency. He said, you showed up one time, you brought her some cookies, and told her what he needed to do, and then you disappeared. We got to show up.
Sorry, in the middle there? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kiaresh, and I'm actually not a member of the University of Baltimore. I'm coming from the community, and I work with Thread, which is a local organization that helps high school students who are struggling at the high school level.
You said Thread, right?
Yeah.
Sarah Heminger?
Yeah.
That's my soul sister.
Yeah.
She's in the book.
Yeah. And I was just wondering, going back to when you were young, when you were 17, was there, and we've identified many forms of reform that we want to implement, but on the personal level, is there a message that you really needed to hear at the time that would have helped, or you think will help for youth that are going through the same situation, and people from the community are volunteering, but we can't necessarily take them out of, a tough neighborhood or a tough environment? Is there a message that would really help those kids?
So I can only think about like when I was young and like just like confused and like unsure like what I want to do with my life. I didn't really have anyone in my life. My mom was being abused at the time, so she wasn't like able to be there for me at this moment. I didn't really have anyone in my life that told me or made me believe or feel like that my life mattered. I just didn't have anyone. Even my teachers, like it was so much stuff that was going on. They were just like, I got mine, you got to get yours or whatever. No one like sat me down and was like, you know what? Like your life matters. Like you're not invisible. Like you can actually like do some stuff in the world, right? And children, like they remember people like who care. And so like I wish like I just had people in my life back then that could like really like push me. Because at a certain point in my life, I just feel like nobody cares. Everybody's dying. So like what does it matter? So I wish I had that.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Monifa Wilson, and I'm a school-based therapist at the Woodbourne School. The Woodbourne School, for those of you who don't know, is a residential treatment center with a school on the campus. The school is a non-public school for students who have behavioral issues. The students are there between the ages of 12 and 18 years of age. They are boys from all over the state of Maryland. We have 2 sex offender units in addition to 2 units for aggressive youth. So the kids there are placed through the Department of Juvenile Services. And I came here tonight because I heard you on NPR, and your story really resonated with me. So as my role as a school social worker, I provide therapies in school, but it's so much deeper than that because really I'm there to save those boys' lives. So I intend to get your book, and I intend to start reading it. We do a morning group where we attempt to get the kids school ready. You know, they're dealing with so much. And mainly it's a lot of dysfunction through their families, it's trauma, it's having been sexually abused, physically and verbally abused, and not having the support of their families. So many of our kids are really struggling with emotional dysregulation. So naturally at the school, we frequently see them act out in ways that young people do when they're in pain, such as fight. So I just really wanted to thank you, frankly, for your story of resilience, because it really inspired me so much so that I came here straight from work. I also teach yoga, mindfulness, and meditation to the kids as well. So I'm just really trying everything, grasping at anything to really save these boys' lives. So I really came here to tell you thank you. I intend to get your book and start reading it in the morning when we start our day. And also, just to throw it out there, if ever you are available, because I understand that you've really blown up as a result of this book. And namaste to you, the light in me honors and recognizes the light in you. But if you're ever available, I would love to invite you to come in and maybe possibly speak at the graduation ceremony for our young men. So just wanted to tell you thank you.
Thank you for the work you do.
Sorry.
Hold on, Marie.
She's working.
This is aerobic.
We need 2 people.
Right, then I'll come down.
Hello, I'm an international student here at the university. My name is Amr. I want to preface this by telling you that I give a lot of campus tours on campus, and I like to throw your name in any tour because you're on TV and stuff like that, so that's cool. My
Product
question to you,
placement.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
That was a product placement.
Yeah, I got your book. I haven't got to read it yet because it's so much homework.
Nice.
But my question to you breaks away a little bit from prison reform. So what are your strategies for both time management and stress management?
That's a good question. So for me, one of my things that I have on like 30-something things you need to remember, like when creating your master plan, is I like to use my mind to think strategically, and I delegate everything else, and I mean everything. Like, you know, I have like an assistant. Like, I don't go grocery shopping. I don't like certain meetings that I don't want to go to that I don't know what's about. Like I'll send him like to a meeting, and I just think on like strategic stuff. The other things that I do that's like very important, like I talk about, is having balance. And so when I first started my companies and I was here at UB, I became my work. Working all day, you got to show up. You got to marry your business, is what they told me in business school. Marry it. You can't be like, you know, quit your job, jump in and like do it. And I'm working all day. And I was burning out. And one of the things I realized after the years, like I was making money and stuff, but what cost? You know, my grades started slipping at school, and like people was like, man, you know, I'm making money, but it's like, man, you failed the midterms and stuff like that, right? And what I realized, right, years later, it's not working hard. It's about working smart and having like balance. And so like I'm real specific on taking care of myself, my mental health. Like I go to therapy once a week. I make sure I go on vacations. I try to eat well. I exercise. And that balance allows me to be more impactful. And so those are some things that I learned.
Hello, my name is Zandra.
No,
Yeah, good,
you got the mic. Yeah.
No, that's good. Yes.
My name is Zandra, and I work here in the HR department as Associate Director of Training and Development. And one of the things I'm interested in hearing a little bit about is your writing process. How did you stay motivated, and how did you begin to even focus your thought? And you know, the end result is the book, The Master Plan, but how did you get into that process? And just speak a little bit about the writing.
So it was tough, sister. But I've journaled since I was 10, and so I journal every day. I'm going to journal about this later on, but like that's been the process. And so having like tubs, and I did it when I was away. So having all like tubs and tubs of like journals and all kinds of stuff. It was a lot of material. It's actually too much, and it's actually a big book. It's like 430-something pages, and I had to trim like tons of stuff from it. But it was very intense, a lot of research, and just like writing. But I work with some amazing folks at my literary agency that helped me with structure and how to synthesize like paragraphs and like chapters and stuff. And so it was a lot of work. It took me 2.5 years, but and I'm biased, but it's a really good book. Just saying.
Okay, and this will be, I think, our last question. Well, second last question.
Last question.
Hi, my name is Jules Smith. I'm a native Washingtonian as well. I read the book and loved it and bought copies to every other man I know.
I love it, yeah.
My question is, throughout the book, it seemed that therapy was something that really helped you along the way. But prior to the incident and going to prison, you didn't seem to have any therapy, which a lot of young boys and girls in urban communities don't get. So to her point, it's not until the young men are in a facility that they receive the therapy. I mean, in all your speaking engagements, do you hear about not just social workers being in the school, but actual therapists? Does that come about?
Yeah.
And if so, if you could tell more.
Yeah, so that does happen. And you're right, like it's so important. Because so oftentimes, even let's take teachers, right? They often misdiagnose like young people in the class who like suffer from trauma or whatever. They think like, oh, you misbehaving or whatever, and like put them out the class. But the other thing too is like we should be more thoughtful about like what our young people are like going through, and like assume, like, and ask like what's going on in your life. And not saying that you have to be a therapist, but like young, it's tough being young. I mean, we all know this, right? Like we, our brains aren't developed, and like we all like, excited about like life and stuff, and we do stupid stuff sometimes, and we often feel like people not listening to us. And so I think we should put more effort in like listening to our young people, but also getting them the help they need, especially when they experience trauma.
Thank you. Now I get the last question. You talked a little bit earlier, and I know in the book you talk about giving back to society. And so can you say a little bit more about what you've done to give back and some of the things that you're thinking about doing?
Yeah. So that's so I'm gonna go off script a little bit, but so one of the things that surprised me since I've been free, and just like growing up in a like tough neighborhood, and just like this happened like a few years ago, and one of the things that like really like humbled me was the power of generosity. And so I remember I used to sit in class and like do all this work and like spreadsheets and like pitching, rise to the challenge, the At-Man business competition, all this stuff, and I wanted to be like an entrepreneur. And I remember meeting this woman that I write about in the book, and she met me for coffee, and we just talked, and I just talked about like what I wanted to do, and like I had all these ideas about the community. I was like, I'm a social entrepreneur. Like I found out what that meant, and she wrote me a check, like a big check, and told me, go start your company, go get a laptop. And then she wrote me a check for my second company. And I was just like, I cried when she wrote me the check. She was like, put it in your pocket, and I just couldn't believe it. And then I was like, I'm gonna pay you back, like when I make money and stuff like that. She was like, don't pay me back, like pay it forward. And so like that feeling of like generosity when someone helps you and don't want anything in return. They don't want their name on the building. They just want you to do right. And she's not related to me. And so as a result, I started painting. I became like relatively successful. And so I decided to start my own foundation a few months ago. And I started here at University of Baltimore. It's the Chris Wilson Second Chance Scholarship Fund, where I will commit, I guess $10,000 a year that helps people in prison working towards a bachelor's degree. And we made it flexible enough when they come home. They need a laptop, they need clothes, and we could support them. And this is how I was able to be successful, because like when I came home, I had people in my corner and supporting me. They got me a laptop, they got me clothes, and like they wrapped their arms around me. And so like that's the world that I imagine. And so I'm happy, I guess, to announce that tonight.
Thank you so much, Chris. I knew about this. We're really, really excited to have this. You know, our students, they're coming home little by little, but the ability to finish their education here on campus is our goal, and the only way we can do it is if we could help support them in that process. So this is huge. This is so exciting. I announced this a few weeks ago at the prison, and the guys were really, really excited to hear this. And tonight we have with us a student who came home a year and 3 months ago. He's going to be a little embarrassed because he doesn't know he's getting this. But I want to award the first student this second chance scholarship. So if Marcus Lilly, who's in the back,
Where's he at?
if you could come up.
So I think, you know, this is a great way to end the evening. It's a real demonstration of living with purpose. So I appreciate it. And, you know, and I think I'm not going to make Marcus's speech yet. We're now going to break, and Chris is available for the next half hour. He's going to sign books. So he'll be in the Bogomoni room next door. Is that right? So, Chris, thank you again for coming.
Thanks you guys for coming out. Okay, thank you.